Hello and welcome back to Mossy Bottom. It's now late August and I thought I'd take a quick break from working on my granary, which you can see behind me. Look out for a video about that soon, to answer some more of your questions and perhaps even dispel a myth or two about my life while I'm at it. So the first question is really all about privilege. I think some people believe that to do what I've done, i.e. to quit your job, to buy an old cottage in the middle of nowhere, and to spend your days restoring it and living off the land, that you need to start in a position of privilege, that you need to have money and opportunity handed to you in life. First of all, let me say, if you're not familiar with my journey so far, then I've posted several talky videos like this one, which if you can bear to sit through me yapping away for 20 plus minutes, will give you a much clearer insight into how and why I made this move, if you're not familiar with the sort of background. So, privilege, I think, is a very kind of relative thing. I grew up in the UK. There was always food on the table and a roof over my head. That really was a privilege in itself, and something not everyone in this world can take for granted. I know that. And I suspect that applies to most of the people watching this video too. But within that context, I grew up in a very working class family. My father was an accountant, my mother was a stay-at-home parent, certainly for the early part of my childhood. We lived in a 2.5 bed semi in the north of England, and I know I don't have the accent, but you can blame my parents for that. It was a kind of a village on the edge of farmland, which for me as a boy was fantastic, but it certainly wasn't somewhere you'd associate with wealth or with privilege. And I left home just before my 18th birthday with only what money I'd saved to my name, and lived in house shares and pokey bedsits in cities for a good 10 years after that, either in education or in work, always saving as much money as I could. I've never been a big spender. There were no holidays at all, or pricey cars or gadgets, and it's that really which has afforded me the opportunity to buy Mossy Bottom and start this life. I've received no handouts or inheritances, and there's no safety net financially if this thing goes wrong. Now that may sound utterly terrifying to anyone watching this, but to me that's living. And even if all of this does go wrong, I'd far rather be living in a way that I find fulfilling than stagnating. So the reality is that to break free from the system in which many of us, including me for a long time, feel trapped, you first have to become part of that system. You need money, therefore you need to work and save. And in doing so, eventually you, like me, will appreciate every second that you get to live like this, because you know what the alternative feels like. And people of so-called privilege who inherit that farm in the wilds, or are given a big chunk of money by wealthy parents to get started, may be just as passionate as you or I, but they'll never experience quite the same joy from having worked their butts off to scratch out the life that they wanted. So privilege, I think, is a double-edged sword. What you really need is willpower, good physical and mental health, which is why acting on those dreams while you're still young is so important. A lot of patience, and I think even more courage. So the second question, which I see in comments all the time, is what happens when you get old? Where does your pension come from? How do you survive when you're too decrepit and worn out to pull potatoes up anymore? So my father died in his early 50s. He hated his job as an accountant. Did it really because he married young, bought a house, had children, and was tied to financial obligations which he couldn't really escape within his lifetime anyway. He loved making things just like me, and lived for his time off work. He was one of those people. And to a greater extent as well, I think, for the promise of retirement and the anticipation of a greater freedom which retirement would have brought him. He died unexpectedly and, of course, never got to experience a single day of that retirement which he dreamt of, and that's very sad, of course. And for me, I think it's impossible to live through something like that as a teenager, as I did, without it having a tremendous influence on my perspective and the choices that I've made in life. One thing I believe categorically is in living for today, not worrying about tomorrow, and in making the most of good health and youth, rather than taking it for granted in the assumption that you'll have it later in life. Now, it's not difficult for me in very practical terms to live like that because of what happened to my dad. It kind of underlines the point very sharply when it's that close to home, so to speak. Of course, that's not going to be true of everyone, and maybe if I came from a family of people who lived into their 90s in good health, my perspective might well be very different. I should add as well that I bought the cottage and land directly. There's no mortgage here, and everything I do adds value to that asset. So in choosing to invest your time and hard work into a piece of land and property, you are in a way creating your own pension. It might not be a particularly fat pension, but it's something that I could potentially release equity from later in life if I needed to. And I'll take that if it means I get to have a contented life. That's enough for me. The third question, which people often ask me in emails, goes something like this. I love what you're doing, and I would love to do the same thing myself one day, but isn't it a whole lot of work? So I'm not normally one for quotes, but there's a scene in the movie Bruce Almighty, bear with me here, in which Morgan Freeman's character of God expounds the virtues of hard work. And he says, nothing wrong with rolling up your sleeves, son. People underestimate the benefits of good old manual labor. There's freedom in it. The happiest people in the world stink like hell at the end of each day. Now, whether you're a fan of Bruce Almighty or not, there is a pure kind of truth in that statement. And for that reason, I think it's always stuck in my mind. Us humans seem to be preoccupied with trying to make our lives physically and practically easier. Why use a brush and pan when you could buy a vacuum cleaner? Why keep chickens when you could just buy eggs? Why grow vegetables when all you have to do is drive to the supermarket, the grocery store, and load up your trolley? The resource that really matters, I believe, isn't money, it's time. We all have a finite amount of time, and we all get to choose, to an extent at least, how we spend that time. And if it's a choice between growing those vegetables and mucking out those chickens, or working for someone else to earn money, to pay for those things, then I know exactly where I'd rather be investing my time. I can only speak for myself, of course. Everyone's different. To answer the question directly, yes, this lifestyle is a huge amount of hard work, but it's the kind of work that's giving you that exhausted, satisfied contentment at the end of each day. It's the kind of work that ticks just about every evolutionary box we have, because it's it's not that dissimilar to how our ancestors lived, with a few notable exceptions like YouTube and cameras. But it's the kind of work where you have control, and if you screw it up, you don't eat or your roof leaks for a year. So yes, it's exhausting, but it's also empowering and fulfilling in equal measure. One of the things which I actually wrestle with quite frequently is when to make something easier and when to leave it alone. And a good example of that is gathering water. The water for showering and clothes washing here at Mossy Bottom comes from a natural spring in the corner of my land. And for over a year, I gathered that water by hand with buckets, one in each hand, and carried it about 60-70 meters up a hill, where it's then filtered into a tank from which I can use it. And I don't drink it, I should point out, it's just used for washing. But I did that at least twice a week in winter as well as summer, and it's blooming cold right now, so you can imagine what it's like in the winter, because this is August. For over a year, the first year that I lived here, I did that. And I did finally choose to invest in an electric solar-powered pump, which does a lot of the work for me. But it was a tough decision, because that little ritual of gathering water in buckets and filling up my tank by hand was, believe it or not, very, very satisfying, especially standing at the end of the day exhausted in a steaming hot shower, and the contentment that I felt. Ultimately, I made the decision to buy a pump for the sake of freeing up more time to invest in other projects, and it was the right decision. But I do have very happy memories of hauling those buckets, if you can believe that. And never in my life have I slept better than I did on those nights. So yes, my life is a lot of hard work, and I think that has a lot to do with why progress on the restoration, for instance, is quite slow. But then, you know, maybe that's the point. I'm happy, and that's what matters. So that's it for this video. Thanks a million for watching, as always. Your positivity in the comments and the emails that I receive, it absolutely shines through, and it really makes me smile on a daily basis. And that always motivates me to keep making these videos. Speaking of which, I've got a very special video planned featuring this guy here coming soon, so watch out for that. If you'd far rather see him on your screen than me, and who can blame you, then I think you'll enjoy that one. But from me and from him, on this chilly August evening, bye for now. Maybe just as passionate as you or I. Maybe just as passionate as you or I. Funny look. But, you know, bollocks. Stop it. You first have to kind of become part of that system. Lie down, stay there. Thank you. So one of the things Yeah, don't knock me off. I'll die if I fall down there. It's a long drop. Ooh. God, it's cold. So yes, my life is a lot of hard work. One of the things which You're a mic messer, you are, Moss. You're a mic messer, Mossy. Mossy, a mic messer. Yeah. Can you just let me finish this, please? Thank you. Just lie down here. Get on me like that. No.